Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning in some parts of Australia, as it is at the moment. We're here this afternoon, as it is in the ACT where I am, for our online event on alcohol and other drugs, disability and overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, forging new partnerships and pathways to achieve better outcomes. So before we kick off today, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm coming to you from here today in the Australian Capital Territory, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people's ongoing contribution to the life of this city and this region. And before we go on, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands that everyone's coming from here today, because we have attendees from all around Australia today. So that's a lot of traditional custodians that we really want to acknowledge and show our respect for today. And I'd also like to welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander attendees who are with us here this afternoon. And I know that there are many of you coming from lots of different places, so welcome. Before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the partner organisations who are part of this online event here today. So my name's Melanie Walker and I'm from the Australian Alcohol and Other Drugs Council, and we are the peak body for the alcohol and other drugs sector in Australia. But we have 6 other partner organisations that have helped with the coordination of today's event. NOFASD Australia, which is the National Organisation for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, Smart Recovery Australia, the Deafness Forum of Australia, Phoenix Consulting, the Australasian Therapeutic Communities Association, and the Deaf Indigenous Community Consultancy as well. So we're in good company here today, and we've got a lot of organisations who've invited their stakeholders to attend this afternoon. So I'd like to thank them for their generosity and their contribution to today's event, and welcome stakeholders for all of those organisations along this afternoon. So what are we talking about here today? Keeping people out of the criminal justice system is one of the key priorities in the Australian Alcohol and Other Drugs Council's strategic plan, and it's also one of the key priorities for all of the partner organisations to this event this afternoon. So this event is going to highlight and explore innovative and collaborative responses to the range of intersecting issues contributing to the overrepresentation of particular population groups in the criminal justice system, including people who use alcohol and other drugs, people with disability, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we've got a big program for you this afternoon, and we're very excited with the speakers that we've been able to present to you. And we're also going to have a Q&A session with our speakers at the end as well. So that will give everyone the opportunity to ask any questions that they have of the speakers around the presentations. So because we have such a big program, we are going to ask everyone to hold their questions till the end. You can punch in your questions at any time though in the Q&A section. So not the chat's disabled, we're not using that one. It's the Q&A function, and you can punch your questions in at any time from now, but just be aware that we'll only start to answer them when we get to the discussion panel at the end of the event. So we're going to let everyone charge through their presentations, and then we'll do the question and answer with the panelists at the end. So that's how we're going to roll. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today, who is Mick Gentleman, MLA, the Minister for Corrections in the ACT government. Now, Mick's not actually able to be with us live today because it is a sitting day in the ACT Legislative Assembly. So he has pre-recorded his presentation for us and wishes us all the best for this event. So for those of you who aren't from the ACT, as I said, Mick Gentleman is the Minister for Corrections in the ACT government here. It's probably worth knowing as well that he holds a number of other portfolios in the ACT. We tend to get the most out of our politicians. We expect them to hold multiple portfolios. He's also the Minister for Industrial Relations, the Minister for Police and Emergency Services. I think there's another couple of titles he holds there, but he is the Minister for Corrections in the ACT, and it's in that capacity that he's coming to be with us today. So Mick is a man of conviction. I've actually, and one of the things about living in the ACT is that we all kind of know each other. I've known Mick for 25 years. He's a lovely guy and someone who I'm very happy to call my friend. Mick is the Corrections Minister at the moment, and he's been working really hard to make some changes in the delivery of services and in policy in the corrections environment in the ACT, particularly for the communities that we serve. And he's going to speak to us today about some new responses in corrections, and in particular 2 initiatives that came about through the 2022-23 ACT government budget, and how implementation of those is going. So the first one is the introduction of a program to assess people at the 𝘥𝘊𝘵𝘭𝘠𝘬 Centre, which is the ACT's prison, for cognitive disability. And the second program he's going to speak to is a one-on-one intensive case management pilot program for a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander detainees. So I think without further ado, I'll let Mick take it away. But it's very exciting for us to have someone, particularly a government minister, talking about the change that they're making in corrective services around the populations that we serve. So I hope, and I know you'll be interested to hear what Mick's got to tell us about today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land I'm speaking on today, and recognise any other people or families with connection to lands of the ACT and region. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to life in this city and the region, and also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's online event. I'd like to thank you for having me here today on the online event on the topic of disability and overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. The ACT government is committed to pursuing pathways that lead to better outcomes in this area, and I'd like to speak to you today about 2 important initiatives that ACT Corrective Services, or ACTCS, are piloting at the ACT's correctional facility, the 𝘥𝘊𝘵𝘭𝘠𝘬 Centre, or the AMC. The first initiative includes screening of people at the AMC for cognitive disability, and the second is a one-on-one intensive case management pilot for a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander detainees. The ACT government recognises there is complex an intersection and impact of disability on recidivism, particularly in relation to access to and capacity to engage in rehabilitative and regenerative programs. Therefore, the important improvement of the identification and data collection of clients with a disability through the new and revised processes, procedures and systems is vital. To address this, ACT Corrective Service is in early stages of incorporating a tool in the induction and screening process at the AMC to screen detainees and determine if they may have a cognitive disability. ACT Corrective Service is currently consulting with relevant sectors, including disability sector, to ensure the selected tool will be fit for detainee needs, as well as the AMC's operational considerations. It's intended that the selected tool will identify detainees who may potentially have a cognitive disability when they are admitted into the AMC. They'll then be referred for a more comprehensive assessment to determine the necessary supports they may require while in custody. Further information on the ACT Corrective Service Common Understanding Principles and Service Approach when working with clients with a disability can be found at the ACTCS Disability Framework released in September 2023. Whilst a decision is yet to be made on what tool will be utilised, the Commissioner of ACT Corrective Services and I are committed to ensuring that individuals with a disability have equitable access to appropriate supports and services across the correctional environment to promote continuity of care. And the tool is expected to inform a de-identified data set that builds on long-term picture of the levels of cognitive disability with detainees. This initiative and further work on implementing such a tool within the corrections environment supports the commitments made by government in the Disability Justice Strategy First Action Plan 2019 to 2023 and aims to achieve equity and inclusion for people with a disability in the justice system. ACTCS supports detainee and offender access to various programs throughout their contact with the criminal justice system. However, the system can be complex to navigate, especially for those individuals facing multiple issues and complex circumstances. And this is often the case with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander detainees or offenders. ACT Corrective Service is implementing an intensive case management pilot for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people engaged in the criminal justice system to provide culturally safe, intensive support, case coordination, and the development of community connections. ACTCS are currently in the process of procuring an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation to provide the intensive case management, which will involve a high level of targeted support for identified clients beyond what is already offered to help them navigate service supports across a broader social services system. During the pilot, an intensive case manager will follow the client for an intensive period to support them with the challenges or complexities they may face pre and post-release from custody. Individuals may face numerous issues when attempting to transition from custody to community, including homelessness, drug dependence, lack of employment, lack of family supports, mental health and/or disability needs. The intensive case manager will focus on continuity of care to ensure the individual is supported over time to address each of these issues. The ultimate aim of the program is to avoid individuals falling through the gaps. They also experience blockages in access to service or simply not knowing what services may be available to assist them. The intensive case managers do not replace or duplicate existing service supports and programs within ACTCS. Instead, they will complement and supplement those existing supports. Following the completion of the tender process, the pilot is intended to run for 2 years. During this period, it's expected that ACT Corrective Service will develop a shared perspective on systems and service gaps across all aspects of the criminal justice and social services systems. I view the introduction of this pilot as an opportunity to address the concerns raised by people with a lived experience of the criminal justice system, who have shared with government their own personal struggles of navigating government systems and services upon their return to the community. And I look forward to the outcomes of the pilot. So I'd like to thank you for having me speak at today's online event. I consider events such as these to be very important mechanisms in continuing to innovate and improve our criminal justice system so we can better support all individuals who come into contact with it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mick. And I know Mick's sorry that he can't be here to participate in the discussion this afternoon, but I will be catching up with him after the event to talk about how that's gone and raise any issues that people bring up here today and bring those to his attention as well. And I think, you know, one of the things that we'll talk about when we get to the discussion panel is why it is that in custodial settings, some people are going to be getting their first assessment for disability. Why is it that people are getting all the way through to being in prison before they get assessment for disability? I think it's great what the ACT government's doing, but I think there's some broader questions here that we need to ask, and perhaps something that's something that we can take up in the discussion session. But obviously there's some exciting things going on here in the ACT. That makes me very proud to live here sometimes. We were obviously the only jurisdiction who voted yes a couple of weekends ago. Also, at the end of this week, well, a year ago almost, the ACT government brought in legislation to decriminalise the possession of small amounts of illicit drugs. And there's been a 12-month process since that vote was had in the Legislative Assembly, while provisions were put in place with police and community services. And I'm proud to say that those things are going to start and kick off this Saturday. So there's some exciting stuff going on in the ACT. So we're really happy that Mick was able to come this afternoon. Okay, so next we're going to talk about through care and transition to community. And up next we have April Long, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Smart Recovery Australia. Smart Recovery Australia provides programs both in the community and in custodial settings So April's in a good position to talk to us today, and she's going to be, the title of her presentation is From the Inside Out, Peer-Led Through Care That's Community and Family Centred. So take it away, April.
Thanks, Mel. Really excited to be here for this important conversation. I'm joining you from 𝘕𝘭𝘆𝘬𝘭 and 𝘥𝘪𝘴𝘵 country, and I'd like to acknowledge the country that I'm joining on and also where everyone else is dialing in from. And at Smart Recovery, when we acknowledge country, we value self-determination and we centre deep listening and collaboration in our work. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about our First Nations program, Yarn Smart. So who is Smart Recovery? What's our mission, our vision, and our 2027 ambition? As Mel outlined, we're really here to support both individuals and their family and friends to manage any behaviour of concern to improve their wellbeing. We have a vision to be Australia's first mutual support, and we really want to grow our recovery meetings to reach 1,000 by 2027. So we're just sitting under 300 recovery meetings at the moment that run both in a custodial environment and out in the community. And when we talk about through care, the research which I'll share with you shows that we get much better outcomes when we support people not just in custody, but also in the community, and we support their family and friends. But what is Smart Recovery? People often think about SMART goals, specific, measurable. SMART actually stands for self-management and recovery training. So we're very much a strength-based self-management group where peers and trained facilitators support each other to set goals for any problematic behaviour. The program itself is underpinned by CBT and motivational interviewing, and our First Nations program utilises narrative therapy and the clinical stages of yarning. We're harm minimisation focused, so for some people, abstinence is their goal. For others, their goal is to look at reducing their behaviour so that it doesn't have a negative impact on their life. We're very much research and evidence informed. I'm going to share some of that today, and that's led by our Research Advisory Council. I think the big difference of our program compared to other mutual support groups is that it is run by peers who are all trained alongside our trained facilitators that might be in an NGO or a government organisation. And where we see this work really well is inside correctional centres, where we are building a recovery community that is led by people with lived experience that understand what each other are going through. We're a global organisation, so I look after Australia and New Zealand, but we're in 31 countries. We have SMART delivered in 13 different languages. And for people wanting to join a meeting, they can do that face-to-face, or they can do that online. And that's really important for people where there might be some shame and stigma in their community about wanting to go to a face-to-face meeting, so they can pop online and they can keep their camera off if that's comfortable for them. We deliver family and friends groups, so that's about supporting the support person. We have groups for young people and our First Nations program, Yarn Smart. So as I mentioned, we're almost at 300 meetings, and we do that in partnership. So a big theme of today's discussion is around how do we get impact in collaboration and in partnership. And at Smart Recovery, we do that with 85 member organisations around the country. I'm sure a lot of people joining know these statistics, but we can never overstate them and remind ourselves that, 1 in 4 Australians will struggle with alcohol, drugs or gambling in their lifetime. And a large proportion of people currently in our criminal justice system have had a history of substance dependency or substance dependency in their family. And we know that 500,000 Australians are currently unable to access any help for their behaviour of concern, whether that's prior to incarceration or when they're back in the community. So as I mentioned, we're for any behaviour of concern. You can see here that 72% of people do come to us for alcohol. Our meetings are not focused on any one behaviour. So you can be in a group with people where alcohol is their concern, others it's gambling, others it's methamphetamine, because we really look at the behaviour that sits underneath as opposed to the actual substance itself. So what's the thinking? How can we support people to set goals for themselves and we do that using our evidence-based tools. These are some of our partners. As an organisation, we're unable to provide specialised housing support, for example. So our partnership with Coast Shelter means that they're able to provide that wraparound support. So we very much have a model where we train up organisations who are bedded in community, who have good relationships with community members and can provide that step up or step down approach that might be needed. So another partner, Clean Slate Clinic, if somebody does need to detox at home, then they've got that support of Clean Slate Clinic. So we really aim to make sure that, you know, we're supporting the whole individual, not just looking at what their AOD needs might be, or, you know, they've come to a meeting for alcohol, there may be domestic violence or other things that need support. And that's why we work with these partners around the country. You can see a few more there on the screen who really work with us to deliver these. ACON, we've got LGBTIQ specific meetings that run. And why we do this is because we know that people are best supported by their community for their community. So we do have LGBTIQ specific meetings, we have women's meetings, we have men's meetings, and we also have those youth meetings for young people. A lot of people know quite well the 12-step model or the AA model. We don't have steps in Smart Recovery. We have 4 points of our program. So building and maintaining motivation, learning to cope with urges and cravings, finding a balanced lifestyle, and problem solving. And we've developed a range of tools. You can see some of them on the screen, such as a cost-benefit analysis, a change plan. Individuals can use these in their meetings. They can use these before their meetings or after. They're all available to download free from our website. And we have developed these into handbooks for those who are in custody, who are able to work through those during the program or once they're back in their cells and wanted to do it as their own self-reflection as well. All of our meetings have one simple takeaway, and that's to leave with a 7-day plan. So we're not about big, bold change, but what can you do in the next 7 days to have lifestyle balance, to achieve your goals? We get very specific. And you can see from a survey that was done here that just over 80% of people left a Smart Recovery meeting with a 7-day plan. But at the heart of it, what we're talking about today is through care. And so the best model that we've seen with the implementation of Smart Recovery Australia is that when people are in custody, they participate in our Inside Out program. And that's people who are sentenced and ready to be pre-release. And we are currently working on a remand specific program because we have a lot of people in custody for a short period of time in Australia. But then we also wrap around support with our family and friends program. So the person who is either a family or friend of the person in custody also gets support. And really importantly, this meeting doesn't focus on the person with the problematic behaviour. It focuses on the support person. But what it enables is a shared language because they're also working through the 4 points of the program. We also have tools for family and friends. So we're creating a recovery community for that individual. And then, of course, they're participating in those SMART meetings back in the community, delivered by one of those 85 member organisations. So that's where we see the real outcomes and benefits of the program versus just isolated service delivery once somebody's in custody, or we're not actually supporting the family and friends who quite often aren't getting a lot of targeted support for themselves. As I mentioned, we are global, so we're in over 200 prisons worldwide. But here in Australia, we partner with ORS, Community Transitions in South Australia. We work with IMHS in all of the immigration detention centres, MTC Broad Spectrum at Parklea Correctional Centre, and Palmerston over in WA in Casuarina and Bunbury, which is a new AOD prison in Western Australia. I really want to share this quote because I will share some of the research in a moment. But this really speaks to the outcomes. So this was from a participant in Jesuit Correctional Centre that says, the impact of being isolated in a place where you're not valued is demoralising and dehumanising. The colour barriers, cultural barriers, and language barriers create a place where to be heard is craved. Yet relationships begin through conversations that break barriers. Instead of a community with no resources, the smart community assists by being willing to hear those who are rarely listened to. This is what not only moves the needle of criminal justice reform, but is the place where rehabilitation becomes reality. And I think that really speaks to the power of this program, where it is creating that community within the correctional environment where people can support each other in their recovery. But now the research that backs this up, which is always important, this was a longitudinal study done across New South Wales correctional centres from 2007 to 2011. And what I really want to focus on here is the change in the reconviction rates reduction when a participant is actually participating in smart recovery programs back in community. So you'll see 8 to 13% reduction in reoffending, or a 13% reduction in violent reconviction rates. But once you add in that through care model of the community participation, we see a 21 to 42% reduction in general and violent crime, and an overall 19% reduction for general offences. So you can see the increase in outcomes, and for this we were looking at reconviction rates, when people had that ongoing support in the community. So it really is important that we provide that through care model, and of course include family and friends. A couple more quotes here from participants over in WA on the Solid Step program. I generally believe the tools I've learned during SMART training will help me reintegrate into the community with positivity and confidence. And that's ultimately what we want, is pathways for people to be back in community and to be supported to stay in community and not be treating what is a health issue of addiction as a criminal justice issue, but actually supporting people in their community. One of the things I'm really proud of when we talk about being peer-led is that we have a model where if you're a participant of smart recovery out in the community, you can train to become a facilitator. And we have beautiful stories where people, as part of their own recovery journey, they take over their meetings that they were once a participant as the facilitator, because they've got their own behaviour under control and they want to give back to their community. So we actually subsidise this training. So it's $25 for the everyday Australian who wants to give back to their community. And if you're a peer that's in a NGO and you want to be trained, it's $250. So we're really creating these pathways because we know that the outcomes are so much better when people are supported by somebody who knows what they're going through and is able to offer that lived experience. And that's exactly how it runs in the correctional environment. We don't have program officers or activity officers running the groups. They're led by the people in custody with the support of an officer they're co-facilitating. I mentioned at the start our Yarn Smart program, which we're really proud of, that's been developed on the back of Dr. Liz Dale's research. So in addition to the 4 points, we now have the 4 Cs, which is country, culture, community, and connection. So our Aboriginal Action Group got together to really look at all the research that people had told us around the program and make sure that the program is culturally competent. So we've redeveloped all of our tools and these will shortly be available on our website. This is just an example on the screen here. So these tools are used both in community but also in the custodial environment. So people are able to work through those and address any behaviour of concern that they want to tackle. I'm conscious of time and I'm keen to get to the Q&A and answer people's questions. But just to finish off, we do have both face-to-face and online training for people who want to run smart recovery in their community. We absolutely can't reach those communities that we need without these specialised organisations being trained up. We obviously have our Inside Out program, our family and friends, Yarn Smart, our LGBTIQ meetings and our youth meetings. And I'm really excited to announce that we're just in the process of starting our first recovery group for the deaf community. So that's something else that we'll be adding to be able to support people. So it's great to be part of this conversation and really keen to answer any questions that people have.
Awesome. Thank you, April. And, you know, you can really see how we've put this program together, I think, here today. We've gone from custodial settings to talking about through care, to talking about some of the cohorts that we have in common in these spaces and how we need to adapt our programs for them. So we're going to have Jared come along a bit later to talk about disability inclusive models of care in the AOD treatment service sector more broadly. But before we get to that, we're going to ask 𝘕𝘭𝘠𝘓 to come along. Kim is a board member for NOFASD Australia and also a general manager at the Department of Correctional Services in South Australia. And Kim's going to start to tell us about some of the cohorts that we are seeing in the criminal justice system. So Kim's going to talk about, obviously, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD, and the criminal justice system to just push us a bit further along our trajectory this afternoon. So thanks, Kim. Take it away.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Mel. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Excellent. Look, thank you everyone for the honour of representing NOFASD Australia and the Justice Centre in this forum. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Kaurna people of the Adelaide region as the traditional custodians of the land which I'm reaching out to you from today. And I'd also like to recognise that the topic that I'm addressing may be distressing for some of the 300 plus people joining us today who may be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure, but also the justice system, whether they be a victim, defendant, accused or a sentenced person. I particularly acknowledge and provide assurance that I personally dedicate my every day to reducing the significant overrepresentation of women and Aboriginal people in custody, and acknowledge the specific impact the justice system has on children, families, Aboriginal people, who are all overrepresented in custodial, child protection, out-of-home environments. I also want to reiterate, as we are talking about FASD, that not all people with FASD end up in the custodial environment, but the evidence is telling us that there is a likelihood of overrepresentation. NOFASD, or the National Organisation for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, is Australia's foundation body for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, charged with the responsibility to educate, advocate, create awareness, and importantly, support those living with FASD from both a lived experience and academic perspective. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a diagnostic term used to describe impacts on the brain and body of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol. It's important that we recognise that FASD is a lifelong disability. Individuals with FASD will experience some degree of challenges in their daily living and need support with motor skills, physical health, learning, memory, attention, communication, emotional regulation, social skills, all those supports required to reach their full potential in life. Each individual with FASD is unique and has areas of both strengths and challenges. FASD commonly occurs as an outcome of parents not being aware of the dangers of alcohol use when pregnant. In layman's terms, what we know is alcohol can cause damage to the unborn child at any time during pregnancy, from conception to birth. The effects of FASD vary considerably and often go undetected, whether it be overlooked, ignored, attributed to another known non-genetic condition, or even simply blamed on poor parenting or post-birth environments.
Hey,
There
Kim,
are two sorry?
I'm sorry to interrupt. We've lost your screen share. Do you want to have another crack at popping that up? Sorry to interrupt your flow, mate.
That's okay.
I just thought there might be something important in there you want us to look at.
Yeah. Okay, let's try again. Have you got me now?
Yep, we can see it. Yep, gotcha. Thank you.
So there are two diagnostic categories for FASD. FASD with 3 sentinel facial features and prenatal alcohol exposure doesn't have to be confirmed. And the second one being FASD with 3 sentinel facial features and prenatal alcohol exposure confirmed. For the justice setting, in particular, the diagnosis of FASD in either category must have 3 impairments of severe neurological domains or more. It's important to note that the 3 sentinel facial features, which include a narrowing width of the eye from the inner to outer point, the groove between the base of the nose and the top lip, and a thin upper lip, only appear in 13% of individuals diagnosed with FASD. Evidence suggests that in general populations, that FASD prevalence has been identified as high as 4% of the community. This is higher than ASD and Down syndrome. As we refine our focus towards the justice setting, which is what we're here today to discuss, we see a significant increase in FASD and neurodevelopmental impairment in the prison and detention populations, as evidenced by the seminal justice research conducted by the Telethon Kinster Institute in Western Australia in 2015. In a cohort of 99 young people, we see researchers diagnosing 36% of those young people with FASD and 89% with at least one domain of severe neurodevelopmental impairment. That's 9 out of 10 children. When we compare that back to a prevalence of 4%. Through screening and diagnostic assessments, this prevalence study has shaped the progression of FASD awareness within Western Australia, in particular the court system, and nationally and cross-border jurisdictions have all taken on this information. But however, in the prison setting, we're still only scraping the surface on how environmentally and therapeutically we can engage and support people with FASD in this setting. Sadly, it is statistically recognised that approximately 60% of young people discharged from youth detention will end up in the adult prison system within 5 years of their last discharge. This should be alarming to us all. As a question you may ask, has similar research been conducted in adult prisons? The simple answer is no. Part of my interest in South Australia Corrective Services is the comprehensive NDIS management model that South Australia has been working on for the last 3 years. This includes admission recognition of pre-assessed diagnosis and a transition to enhanced support around NDIS management and post-release support. Over the past 3 years, South Australia Corrections has supported over 500 people to engage the NDIS system with funded plans and the goal to establish tailored support for their individual needs prior to discharge from custody. This has enabled me to access the data that you can see on your screen, which represents 239 active participants, unfortunately with single diagnosis as part of who are participating in the NDIS program. Whilst only a sample and not a true reflection of the neurodiversity in adult prisons, it is known and live data. And in reality for South Australia only represents an understanding of 10% of the entire prison population. What is noticeable is FASD is not recognised in the system. As you can imagine, the impact of having incomplete diagnosis or no diagnosis, irrespective of the likely prevalence in these cohorts, confounds our capacity to provide appropriate levels of care and support. And in reality results in little or no conversation in the prison setting for staff who have day-to-day interactions with people in custody. Not knowing also presents a significant challenge in identifying the potential risks of community management and the risks of offending in these cohorts. The complexity of the diagnostic tools that are required to assess are represented as a barrier at this time, and something that nationally NOFASD, but also other FASD networks are really trying to drive back into the custodial environment. The additional aspect of having a lack of FASD awareness in the justice setting also begs the question whether or not individuals have the capacity to legally or actively make decisions that underpin offending, and whether that's been correctly assessed by police, courts, and the legal fraternity before people end up in custody. The implications of this are significant, with 2 known active pieces of case law in Australia at the moment, one alleged manslaughter by a juvenile in Queensland and one unlawfully on premises / robbery by an adult in South Australia. Both parties deemed not fit to enter a plea due to the significant impairment associated with FASD diagnosis. This leads to the question, should every person who enters the prison system be provided the support for diagnosis if that hasn't been provided at the community setting? I think it's true to say that nationally, community is looking for justice to reform its practices. In this context, change requires improved understanding of those we are charged to be in the care of. To understand our cohorts in this context, I again reiterate, requires diagnosis and sharing of information as a critical pathway to change. This alone will have a significant benefit on how we do business, ranging from assessments on admissions, how we manage risk and needs, case management principles, the risk of reoffending and how we assess and address criminality in that context. And unfortunately, based on the numbers we're seeing out of Western Australia youth justice system, a significant push has to be done around supporting fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in our setting. A simple example of managing people in the custodial setting is this slide on age of dysmaturity and the complexity of working with people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. In particular, when we see someone with a neurotypical age, a biological age of 18 and showing neurotypical responses around living skills, social skills, comprehension and emotional maturity as low as 6 years of age. Not only does this present a risk for these people in the custodial environment of violence and bullying, but also results in many cases in an immeasurable understanding at this time around excessive confinement and people being held in restrictive environments that may actually not be supportive of what their true diagnostic needs are. We must, as a society, understand that every contact with the justice system and prison setting includes complex legal and human rights conversations, requiring on many occasions self-advocacy against the system. For people with FASD who have difficulty remembering, speech and language disorders, difficulty with reading and comprehension, challenges with literacy and numeracy and abstract thinking, the access and movement through the justice system can be insurmountable and the outcomes life-changing. Impact on individuals who have an inability to understand cause and effect, difficulty organising tasks and materials, an inability to understand consequences or punishment, and struggle with impulse control, again, will no doubt have massive challenges when engaging with police, the legal system, and corrective services environments. So what is the FASD lens, and how can we support people through the FASD, through FASD better in the justice system? The first step is really understanding that it's not that people with FASD won't understand or won't engage, it's that they physically can't. The FASD informed lens tells us that we should ensure supports for all persons with neurological diverse needs consider that aspect. That we reframe our understanding that it's not that they won't, they can't. That they're not inappropriate, they just don't understand boundaries and need additional supports. That they're not being aggressive at the time of contact. They may be just deregulated in their behaviours and require some additional assistance and support to understand or manage sensory challenging environments. Strategies and accommodations. As I come to conclude this really brief topic, and it is very challenging to discuss this outcome in just a short 10 minutes, it's important that frontline workers are FASD informed and given the appropriate training, that programs in prisons and the justice system and the associated interventions are supportive of the developmental age of the individual, not chronological age, that we understand the drivers of FASD, that we modify our counselling and supports to support their specific needs, but most importantly, that we apply the appropriate diagnosis with functional support plans to really understand what is happening for the individual. In summary, FASD is a complex neuro and physical disability, and it can be different for everyone. Early diagnosis and intervention is key to providing appropriate supports, whether that's in custodial environments or as we transition people into the community. We need to understand the individual developmental age across the domains. And in our settings, we need to focus on strength. Justice needs to adapt and accommodate, not the other way around. Because this is a difficult topic, I would encourage everyone to reach out to the NOFASD website. We have extensive amounts of information available to people, whether they're professionals in the health industry, education industry, in the justice setting, and across all areas of community support. Thank you for listening to this very brief message, and like our others, I look forward to answering some questions.
Thanks, Kim. That was awesome. And I think it gives all of us a lot to think about in the different settings that we work in. And just as Kim has illustrated the numbers in terms of people in the custodial settings and in the criminal justice system, from the alcohol and other drug sectors perspective, we know that because of our shared cohorts, it's likely that we have very high numbers of people in alcohol and other drug treatment settings, particularly residential settings. The rates of FASD are probably looking pretty high in those settings too. But again, we have no evidence to back that up because there haven't been any studies done. So that's something that we're looking at going forward. But the take home from that is really about adapting the way that we work with people with disability, and as well in terms of the importance of assessment in a range of settings so that we can adapt the way that we work to better meet the needs of people with different disabilities. And I think there'll be something to talk about when we get to the discussion phase about the role of the NDIA and the NDIS in this as well, because surely it's not just about the criminal justice sector and the alcohol and other drug sector or the homelessness sector having to do all of this service delivery by themselves. Surely there should be something there about being able to create linkages with the NDIS to ensure that people get the assessments they need, are able to apply for the NDIS and get NDIS plans in place that meet their needs as well. Because what we're seeing is people are not getting access to these things when they come from the kind of backgrounds that a lot of our cohorts do. So I'll put a pin in that for a little bit, and we will go on to our next speaker, who is Nicole Hewlett. Nicole is the project manager for the First Nations Cancer and Wellbeing Research Program in the School of Public Health at the University of Queensland. Now, Nicole's going to talk to us about some research that she's done and what's come out of that, but she's not able to be here in person to talk to us about the Australian FASD Indigenous framework because she's out teaching clinicians how to use it today. So what we have is a pre-record from Nicole. It's a research story about the creation of the Australian FASD Indigenous framework, Aboriginal healing informed and strength-based ways of knowing, being and doing. And I think that it'll give us something more to think about in terms of how we adapt our practice across different settings going forward. So take it away, Nicole's video.
𝘕𝘭𝘭𝘤𝘰𝘭. My name is Nicole Hewlett and I am a proud Palawun from 𝘕𝘭𝘭𝘠𝘬, Tasmania. In terms of my research interests, I am passionate about equity, healing and justice for our people. So I dedicate a lot of my time and my spirit to finding ways in which we can genuinely translate knowledge around FASD to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities throughout Australia. The aim of this research was to do just that. We wanted to know what ingredients are necessary for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have equitable access to FASD knowledge, assessment, diagnosis and support. What our research found was that in order for Aboriginal people to have equitable access to FASD resources, we first must have solidarity as an Australian society, because at the heart of equity and even progress is our ability to walk alongside each other and have genuine two-way knowledge sharing, where we see both Aboriginal wisdom and Western wisdom come together in a balanced way to complement and strengthen each other. And there is so much to gain from both wisdoms. Aboriginal wisdom is inherently strength-based, healing informed and grounded in holistic and integrated support. And Western wisdom brings biomedicine knowledge and practice as well as therapeutic models. This means for Aboriginal peoples and any professionals working with our community in FASD is that there are shifts that both non-Indigenous clinicians and Aboriginal peoples can make in their respective ways of knowing, being and doing in order to facilitate our people's access to healing-informed, strengths-based and culturally responsive FASD resources like FASD knowledge, assessment, diagnosis and support. I guess the ultimate goal of this research is to really draw from Aboriginal and Western wisdom to create a new knowledge and a new practice that brings a new way of knowing, being and doing, where we see healing, access, respect, support, and most importantly, hope experienced by all Australians living with FASD. And I guess it sounds probably more like a vision or a woo-woo kind of dream, but it can absolutely become a reality if we understand how to come together and share wisdom equally and respectfully. And I think that Australia, and in fact the world, is understanding more and more the kind of profound and immeasurable value and benefit that is offered by ancient wisdom of Indigenous peoples. And that is especially in terms of sustaining the health and wellness of all forms of life on this planet, including ourselves. We simply need to be listened to, and I think this research highlights that Australia is ready to do just that.
Thanks, Nick. And I think what Nicole's got to say and has had to say to us today particularly resonates in light of recent events. And certainly our organisations acknowledge that we need to listen and hear, and that the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are absolutely integral to the work that we do and the outcomes that we're trying to seek in terms of the populations that we serve. So it was really lovely that Nick was able to record that for us today, even though she's out in the world doing her good work and spreading the good word. So that's great. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to hear about another cohort that we serve and is overrepresented in the settings that we've been talking about here today. And 𝘰𝘵𝘩𝘰𝘭 from the Deaf Indigenous Community Consultancy is here with us today. And 𝘰𝘵 has made a particularly big effort because she just got off a flight from LA today. So I think it's particularly amazing that she's been able to come and be with us live today. So thank you, 𝘰𝘵. The title of 𝘰𝘵's presentation is Hey, Hear Me Out, Voices of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Mob on Challenges at the Interface of the NDIS, AOD services and the justice system, which I think really goes to the heart of what we're talking about here today in terms of those intersecting communities of people that we serve. So thanks, 𝘰𝘵. Take it away, mate.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we have a frozen screen.
Technical difficulties. See, this is what happens when you do live television. We've got her back. We've got her back.
Oh, you can see me now?
Excellent. We've got her back. I was about to.
Is it working okay?
But
okay.
Let's go with it and see how we go.
Okay. Let's have our fingers crossed. I've had no interruptions at all, no delays until right this very moment. I've been watching and been fascinated by all of the presentations. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the lands on where I am at the moment, which is at home in Shepparton, 𝘰𝘄𝘰𝘭 country. I would like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay respects to all First Nations elders and participants watching today, and all of you that are working in the field so that we can improve the lives of First Nations people in custody and those who have need for support that we all provide. Well, For me, I think I can only say and speak from my 35 years of experience, but I also have some expertise in other working relationships who have worked with me in this context. And that what those people, one is Damien Howard, Dr. Damien Howard, and Dr. Alex Devine. So, sorry, I'm trying to adjust because I've been using 3 different sign languages for the past little while. So I've got to go back to Auslan. My apologies to the interpreter. So on this topic, when we're talking about deaf and hard of hearing people involved in AOD or concerns in the criminal justice system or in custody, there are a number of topics we've already heard today from the speakers, which have been amazing, and they've covered a lot of things, and you can apply every one of those issues to those people who are in custody who also have a hearing loss. Hearing loss is an intersectional element that impacts all First Nations people broadly. People in the mainstream often have issues with alcohol and drug dependence or concerns in their life. We do know that alcohol can create barriers to ensuring that, well, there are difficulties with interpersonal skills, how people can make sure that their lives are free of stress and anxiety, which can lead to suspicion, and people with hearing loss and workers who have had this experience working with them find that there's barriers to communication. In my experience working in the area, we have seen that many deaf and hard of hearing people who are not using Auslan and are using First Nations sign language systems or home signs or very basic gestures, skills for communication in the legal system creates a barrier. For example, when you're talking about the 94% of people or inmates in the Northern Territory, 94% have a hearing loss. And that's a huge number. We've seen evidence in other jurisdictions throughout the country where the numbers can be even higher. And it's all anecdotal evidence. So we agree that we don't have enough research and funding for research to actually look at this issue to ensure that people can actually be part of a development process so that there are pathways and there are elements that can be improved with their lives and their participation in opportunities. And I'd be keen to hear the program that was discussed earlier, the SMART program, and how they're going to focus on deaf people. I think that's terrific. We do know that there is a number of long ongoing alcohol issues that can make community members feel disconnected, not only in the justice system, but in the community at large as well. So we also need to look at how we can work collaboratively to provide the support and the disadvantage and reduce that recidivism for people who are in custody. We need to see how the legal system itself, front of house right through to back of house, can understand what it actually means for First Nations people who have a hearing loss, whether they be deaf or hard of hearing, how those access issues can be improved throughout the system. We also know there are a multitude of issues with services not getting adequate funding for AOD services. You see all of this as a rising issue. They're trying to recruit the funds to ensure that they can support people at the early intervention stage. And this is youth custody centres right through to police stations, and then further on working individually with people such as youth workers, NDIS staff, and a multitude of others. It's a huge number of people that need to have this knowledge. For example, if we have First Nations programs where participants have a hearing loss and they've been tested, then the AOD staff can actually assess what that means and understand what that means for their communication, whether that leads to communication confusion. And it might be a lot of assumptions are being made. So discussions need to occur so that those relationships can be valuable relationships. We want to ensure that the NDIS and the NDIA, as well as organisations who work in this space, work collaboratively so that we can see improvements with staff who work in the field. And when they're working with people with a hearing loss, there are a lot of communication breakdowns. At the moment, we can see that there's provision to the community in terms of delivering training and assessment and how that can be delivered in a way that provides opportunities for strengths to increase for self-determination. The community itself, being able to pick the right cultural appropriate workers to work in this space to reduce harm, and also to support the actual clients who need to have this work done with them who have a hearing loss. We need to better understand and be aware how people can see deafness and hard of hearing people within the community, that this is not a new issue. This has been an ongoing one. We see youth services and people in youth detention not being picked up and identified. The services are not providing accessibility to those who are deaf or hard of hearing with sound amplification or sign language interpreters, or even the services themselves who understand sign language systems are not providing those services that are needed. In the NT, for example, for many years, there has been the growing network of provision to provide support. And there's research and evidence that can assist organisations and identify what's needed for the services that are being provided so that they can improve the quality of life of individuals and make it equitable. And we need to make sure that our relationships with community is the best it can be with the communication that we can offer to them. Part of our work is to make sure that we reduce behaviours of concern, and we need to make sure that the community themselves can communicate and have those discussions. Alcohol and other drug services can only be scratching the surface for some individuals, and going into depth in any form is not possible unless you're providing deaf and hard of hearing people with the communication needs that they have. And hopefully that can really enable them to feel a sense of belonging. Hopefully we can see what the good work we've seen today and how that can be spread throughout the country, and how we can share with each other the knowledge that we each have. And that certainly will improve the lives of those who are First Nations who are deaf and hard of hearing. I'm hoping that all other people who need support as well are not ignoring these other concerns, which I'm raising as deafness and hard of hearing, so that they can improve their quality of life. I'm hoping that all staff will do the best that they can with the training that's provided, so that clients can have an improved quality of life. I think it might be time to stop, because I think my time is almost at its end. And I hope I didn't repeat myself too much. I'm sorry for the interpreters. I'm just adjusting to the new sign language. I've been signing in American Sign Language for the last little while in Mexico.
Thanks, Jodie. I think you've done an amazing job, given that you've just got off a plane. That's awesome. Thank you.
All
Jet
good.
lag is such a terrible barrier as well. Like, anyone would have struggled with that. And as well, you had a technical dropout in the middle. So thanks, mate, for sticking with us. You've done an amazing job. So I think what Jodie's raised as well is that continuing theme around access, communication and equity for the different communities that we serve. And I think that's something that we're going to explore more in the panel session. And in the meantime, in acknowledging that for us as the AOD sector, we're constantly understanding that we need to evolve and change to improve the accessibility of our services for different communities of interest. And we've heard from both Kim and also from Jodie about how the issues we're talking about today are disproportionately felt by particular community members who have suffered from particular vulnerabilities and disadvantage. I think it's really important that we now throw to Jared. Jared Byrne is the president of the Australasian Therapeutic Communities Association, and he's also the operations manager for WHO's treatment services. So Jared is going to talk about disability inclusive models of care in the AOD treatment service sector, because there's been some really interesting developments in recent years. So thanks, Jared. I think you'll lead really well into our discussion session after you. Take it away, mate.
Thank you, Mel. I'll just share my screen. And I hope that's sharing appropriately. Yep.
Yep, got it.
Thanks. So as Mel said, my name's Jared Byrne, and I'm coming to you from the Wongal land of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present at this forum today. I know that in a sense I'm here to speak about the AOD response to disability, but I can't do that without moving past first what's going on in the criminal justice system, because of the very large push in relation to diversion programs for people, who are coming in contact with criminal justice system, find themselves in prison, and then access a diversion program, whether it's the drug court or a merit or a 𝘕 or one of the various versions of that that's happening around Australia. So there's around about 52,000 people that are in prison in any one time in Australia, give or take whenever that census is taken. And of those, the AIHW estimate that around about 29% of that population have a disability. Around about 17,000 of those people that are in prison are there on remand. So they're trying to access bail or a diversion program. And so then that actually then influences, people coming into AOD services in terms of the type of needs that they have. I think one of the key drivers in this has been this tough on crime approach, which we start to hear much more about across Australia, where we have the focus being on criminality as opposed to on people. Now, this approach is indiscriminate. It doesn't consider the person. It doesn't consider the factors that not only contribute to their offending behaviour, but also their background. And it also doesn't consider the specific needs of people with disabilities. And that's at all levels of the criminal justice system, whether it's at the policing level, at the court level, and at the incarceration level. And alternatives that might be more disability inclusive or disability friendly, things like, community-based corrections orders, diversion into treatment, home detention, those sort of initiatives are only now starting to get some increased traction within the sentencing framework. But these responses as well also need to consider the needs of people with disabilities. There are some good diversion programs around. And as I said, the reason I'm focusing on that to start with is because this is a significant number of people in contact with the criminal justice system and in fact incarcerated who are moving through that system and into AOD services, whether that be a residential therapeutic community or an outline program, or whether it's a generalised case management program. However, the overrepresentation in the criminal justice system is also represented in drug and alcohol services. So, as far as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are concerned, this is a fairly common known statistic from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, where 3% of the Australian population account for 29% of the prison population. And we've just heard some statistics in relation to the impact of hearing on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the prison systems. The rate of imprisonment is 13.3 times that of non-Indigenous rate. So again, there's this overrepresentation of Australia's First Nations people in the criminal justice system, and we also have just been hearing about the higher levels of disability that are experienced by those. So for AOD services, when it comes to forging new partnerships and pathways to achieve better outcomes, AOD services, and including members of the ATCA, work hard to achieve this goal, but the reality is that a feature of that service system to be mature enough to be able to provide those services is only just beginning. People seeking with disabilities who seek an AOD service, and the capacity of that service system to respond to them is still a work in progress. There are areas where it is done very well, and there are areas where there's more learning and more progress to be made. There's not really been a consistent support network, provided through, say, funding or training strategies for drug and alcohol services, and that includes their staff, to be able to move down that road in a concerted and robust manner. However, as I said, it's done very well in some places, and in other places, progress is definitely being made. Partnerships are important in this, particularly with disability service providers. They carry the specialist and that specific knowledge that specialist drug and alcohol services who have that area of specialisation, drug and alcohol, need to learn from. Health and allied health services also play a key part in these partnerships. Now, most drug and alcohol services do have solid partnerships built with health and allied health services, but that is for the general and physical health needs of people, things like dental health and mental health conditions. But when it comes to disability, building the capacity of AOD services to continue that development in terms of their disability inclusive responses is critical in terms of partnerships with those specialist services for people with disabilities. So how they look? It's an inclusive treatment community for all, so that every person, no matter what the disability, can have access to a service and can be welcomed into that service and have a sense in which that service recognises them. Collaboration is key, as I've mentioned before, particularly with specialist services for people with disabilities, because AOD services specialise in their arena and disability services specialise in their arena. So bringing those two sectors together, I think, is a critical aspect of ensuring that disability inclusive models are embedded in AOD treatment service practice. Also, the sharing of the practice wisdom, not only from the disability sector, for argument's sake, to the AOD sector, but also within the AOD sector, sharing learnings and sharing the innovations that happen. Care coordination is critical. As far as providing services to people with disability that provide an all-rounded approach to meeting the range of needs that they have, care coordination between a range of services is very important, and also ensuring that there's common goals in relation to that coordination. And also collective accountability or a responsibility for the outcome, so that there's a sense in which aspects of a person's care plan, for argument's sake, aren't handed over to another agency, but it's more that within that collaborative framework, with a care coordination approach, that collective accountability is the overriding factor that is paramount in the approach for the service provision. And of course, that avoiding the duplication, very important, and sharing specialisation. But really importantly is bringing people together, particularly and most importantly, people with living experience of disability. So some of the things that have been happening are looking at recruitment of people with disability, ensuring that we have that lived experience within the AOD sector, provide staff with disability awareness training, and just as importantly, providing other clients or residents of therapeutic communities with disability awareness sessions. So providing them with information on disability and ensuring that they understand the needs of people with disability and have an understanding of the lived experience of people with disability. Importantly, participation of people with disabilities in service design. They know what their needs are, and it's important that there's a place for them at the table when services are designed or reviewed or evaluated. Modifying buildings to ensure they're suitable, and I have to say that that's when possible. Many NGO drug and alcohol services exist in not-for-purpose built buildings and have making the best of what they can, but we should all do what we can do. Reviewing program materials to ensure they're suitable for people with disability, that they're inclusive, that the language is inclusive, and that the presentation of them is inclusive. And then things like the signage and other resources to support people who may be blind, deaf, or vision or hearing impaired. Adequate resources and supports, things like having, interpreters and Auslan available for people with, hearing impairment, and disability employment and training providers, as well as solid relationships with housing providers. These approaches can significantly contribute to the removal of attitudinal, behavioural and physical barriers for people with disability, and also go a long way to contributing to equality of access and equity in terms of service provision for people with disabilities. And it will also contribute to people feeling valued and respected as they engage with drug and alcohol services. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand you back to Al.
Thanks, Jared. That's great. And I think you've led in really well to our discussion section that we're going to go to in a second. But I think just to kind of bring it together, everyone's heard the stats that our speakers have given us throughout this afternoon's presentations, but just to overlay with that, We know from the AIHW that 70% of people in adult custodial facilities across Australia, 70% have used drugs, that's illicit drugs, in the 12 months prior to their incarceration. And when you're looking at the juvenile justice settings, it's about 66%. So you can see that there are quite serious intersections and overlays between the different communities that our sectors serve, and you can see how those play into the kind of things that we're talking about here today. So we're now going to move into panel mode. So watch us pivot again and overcome technology again. So we're going to bring our speakers back, as well as our wonderful Auslan interpreters. And we're going to continue the conversation in discussion mode. But before I throw to audience questions, and there are a few coming in already, I can see them. You guys in the audience can't, but I can see them as they come in, and I'll be throwing them at the panel. So if everyone in the online audience would like to think about and start punching their questions into the Q&A function, before we do that, I'd like to go to each of our speakers. I mean, you guys have a lot of expertise in your fields, and we're all coming from different areas today, and you've all heard a lot of stuff this afternoon. So I thought before we throw to audience questions, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that have been said by the other speakers this afternoon, and particularly thinking about what we wanted to talk about in this discussion session in terms of mechanisms for forging new collaborations and pathways to achieve better health and social outcomes for people with complex and intersecting needs. I'd like to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with you, April, just because you spoke first out of the people that we've got left here. What have the presentations that you've heard today put in mind for you in thinking about this stuff a little bit further?
I think the common thread that's come through is the partnerships and the collaboration. So, you know, there are a lot of gaps, and we've heard about them in terms of disability, in terms of AOD support, you know, the fact that 17,000 people on remand, and we don't have a lot of remand specific programs. These are all gaps, but I think it's really important that we have these kinds of events and actually get to connect. You know, Jody, you know, talked about smart recovery for the deaf community, wanting to hear more about that. As a service system, none of us can do everything, and it's really important that we actually connect up our services so, you know, we can actually fill those gaps as best as possible. However, I think it's not just on us as a sector, it's also about government actually supporting that and enabling that. And, you know, when you talk about the corrections environment, you know, what are we actually doing to break down some of those barriers and make sure that, you know, if we're looking at FASD, that, you know, diagnosis questions are asked, it happens, you know, all across the system. So that was the key takeaway from me, is just, you know, we all knew partnerships are important, but just from hearing other speakers present, there's so many potential, you know, collaborations. So I'm looking forward to those from here on out.
Before I let you off the hook and throw to Kim, do you want to just give Jody a little bit more information about the new group that you're starting for deaf and hearing impaired people?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the beauty of this was that it was community led. So we had a few people reach out to us and, you know, really identify that for them, smart recovery meetings were not culturally appropriate, were not linguistically appropriate. So we have a national trainer who just happens to be, in her words, not fluent in Auslan, but is able to train up facilitators who will then be delivering those meetings for the community. So that is our model, is that, you know, we support community members and organisations to run it. So it's not something that, you know, we identified, but rather community reached out to us. And so really excited to see those grow and be able to support people.
Awesome, thank you. Kim, what have you learned this afternoon, and what were your take homes from what other people said?
I think the work that needs to continue, and it's something dear to me, spending time with not-for-profit, is breaking down the barriers that are institutionalised in the prison setting and actually allowing the experts to come in and share their expertise and take control. And you know, the institutionalized nature of prisons is about command and control, and actually undoing that and enabling the professionals to come in and relinquish control to them to take the lead. And it's very, very evident, you know, that it's in the Aboriginal community that we need to do that, but in the disability sector as well, actually being able to stand back and levering our strengths and then opening up to lever the strengths of every other network that's out there.
Thank you. I think that's definitely true. And I think we've all learned a lot this afternoon from each other as well. Jody, was there something that you wanted to follow up with April, or just go straight into your thoughts on what you've learnt this afternoon, mate?
I think it's wonderful, the concept, when we're thinking about community self-determination and supporting community about how to find out the ways in which they can improve and support each other from within. I think that's terrific. Not all communities need it, but we do know that those who do need it can get it. And I think that that's wonderful to see. And especially the queer community being involved as well. And I think when we look at the intersectionality of people, there can be a lot of choices for them to then be able to determine what's best. And how you can approach that can be done in a way that then fits their cultural needs as well. And I think it's great to see that this is being provided in the community and having cultural safe ways in which benefits can be seen. I've heard stories from community members where people say, oh, this is a deaf issue, this is a disability issue, or this is an Aboriginal community issue. And I can fit myself into so many of the intersectional parts of myself into what people say. And I think it's really good that people can have those options and opportunities so they can feel comfortable in selecting the services that are going to benefit them in their recovery.
Thanks, mate. Jared, what would you like to say? I mean, you covered a little bit of in your presentation, but were there other things you wanted to add in response to some of the other presentations?
Look, I think for me that there has been a theme in relation to collaboration. I think, like, as far as drug and alcohol services, and again, I don't want to necessarily link any particular group with the criminal justice system, but I do think that with the turbocharging of diversion programs that's occurring, people from the criminal justice system are gaining an overrepresentation now in drug and alcohol services, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, it's not. But if you have a look at the background of the cohort and the people that are coming in, they are coming with more specialised needs, and there's more need for the AOD sector to become much more agile, to be able to respond to people with a whole range of disabilities, whether it's, to do with the hearing or it's physical disability, or, whether there's an intellectual impairment that's occurred there. We've heard of the impact of FASD on people. So I think it's, where 20 years ago we did drug and alcohol work. Now we do drug and alcohol work and all the other stuff that comes with it, because we focus on people, which is the issue with being tough on crime, because it doesn't focus on people.
That was a beautiful segue for me there, Jared. I just wanted to go there. I think Jared and I were in a meeting the other day where he was talking about what he was just talking about there, and people from the alcohol and other drug sector who've been in it for a while have been talking about this to me a lot recently, how the complexity of the clients that they're serving has increased over the years. You're not just delivering an episode of care in terms of drug and alcohol treatment. You're dealing with domestic and family violence, housing, disability issues, issues around access to other community services. These things are taking up an increasing amount of time and requiring an increasing level of expertise of certainly our workforce. And in looking at what Kim was saying and what Mick was saying at the beginning when he kicked off as well, it's not just, I guess what I've learned, sorry, I just need a drink of water, hang on. That's not exclusive to the AOD sector, obviously. It's something that's happening in the custodial sector. It's something that's happening in the homelessness sector. We're getting much better at seeing people holistically. And I think the Aboriginal community controlled sector has done this well historically, but some of these other sectors are now playing catch up and starting to get that same sort of vibe going. And what it's meaning is we are providing better person-centered care, but we're also needing to do more. And we're not getting any more funding. We're needing our staff to be more skilled, and we're needing them to build collaborations and partnerships with other sectors. And we're just kind of learning how to do that. Before we throw to questions, which we have got a lot of great Q&A questions coming in that I'm really looking forward to capping off in a minute. I'd like to talk to you though about this idea of the NDIS and how that assists with communities that we serve. Because obviously we've started this idea, and some of the Q&A questions that are coming in are around, yeah, it's great to have assessments in particular settings, but we need that to lead to NDIS applications and NDIS plans that then support through care. Because how much more could we be doing in terms of through care, whether that be from AOD residential treatment settings or from custodial settings, if people were able to buy in this extra expertise to support their disability needs. So before we throw to the audience questions, I'm going to take my chair's prerogative and throw that one at you. Kim, what do you reckon? How can we, as in our sectors, try and link better with the NDIS to facilitate some of those add-ons to our service provision in terms of, in particular, transition to community?
It's a really good question.
I
think I think from a corrective service perspective, only now is corrective services across the country starting to understand how to support people into the NDIS space, as opposed to waiting for it to be a post-release option. So now that we're building teams inside our areas that can do the assessments hand in hand with the people and allow them to take that information with them, because obviously they own the plans, which answers one of the other questions that came up there. Now we're starting to see that progression forward. And now we face the same issue that the members of the community face, in that there's not enough service provision out there that's dedicated to specialist cohorts. So that's the challenge, is, you know, some of the cohorts that we manage in the prison setting, who encompass everything that you said, Mel, in particular in the women's estates where I'm connected, the increasing amount of significant psychotic behaviours and long-term drivers of psychosis makes it very difficult for some NDIS providers to actually provide supports or employ people that will work in that level of risk. So it's a huge challenge.
It totally is. And I think, you know, coming out of our discussion today, it's a bit beholden on us, and I'm certainly taking it on, and I'll be hitting you guys up to come to some meetings with me later, for us to go and meet with the NDIA around these cohorts we're talking about. Because you're right, you did right there, Kim. Like, if we help people to get applications and assessments up, it's then going to be really important that there are providers in place that are able to provide services or able to link with the services that we have, say, in the AOD sector, that aren't necessarily NDIS funded but can provide support in that way. And it goes to housing and a whole range of things as well. April, I can see you're dying to say something about this as well. Jump in, mate.
Look, I think we just need to acknowledge that overwhelmingly the vast majority of people leave prison with no plan, you know, whether that is around housing, whether that is around, you know, AOD support. You know, that is the current reality in our country, that, you know, there is not through care happening, or, you know, case management. There are isolated examples and incredible organisations doing the best they can with the resources they have, but we do not have an integrated service system at all. And most people, leave prison. They're left to a family or friend to, pick up the pieces and try and support without any ongoing support. So I think we've got a massive job to do. And I think everybody, needs to be at the table, and we need to create those supports for people. But the other thing I'll just quickly raise is we don't have a family placement principle in our country. So, in every jurisdiction, when somebody's incarcerated, they are not near their family or friends. They can be moved around quite a lot, and that makes service provision really difficult to do. Even if they are connected into a service, they can then be, moved around. So that creates another barrier to actually then wrap support around them. So yeah, just want to highlight that one because it's a big challenge. Not so much in the ACT where you've only got one correctional centre, but certainly in New South Wales and WA and other areas, it's a massive challenge.
Absolutely. Now, just because we're a deeply inclusive mob here, I'm going to phone a friend on this and pull someone else into the panel. That's what I've just been wildly texting about there. Louise Gray is the CEO of NOFASD Australia, and she's over in Canada at the moment. So her time frame, she's probably on a time frame similar to yours, Jody. Louise, sorry to pull you in, mate, without giving you an opportunity there, but I could see that you were sitting there, and I'm just interested in your thoughts on this.
Oh, thanks, Mel. Thanks a lot. And thank you, everyone. I've actually really enjoyed listening. And the button said that my camera was off and my microphone was off, so I listened. But I think the critical thing is, well, there's two. One is that prisons pick up people at the end of a journey of systemic being forgotten about and being disregarded and not being assessed and not being adequately dealt with. And it's a very complex system, a prison system, because they're maintaining security for the community. That's one of their prime goals. So I think for NOFASD, it's certainly a big concern that we look at the systems that are responsible for people all the way along from the moment they're born, because it's a big ask to expect a system of incarceration and confinement to also pick up disability, employment, social services issues, family issues, relationship issues. And then the other thing is the NDIA. If people do end up in contact and they're justice involved, then clearly that linking the the national service that Australia is very proud of, rightfully, needs to be linked into prisons as a primary goal. And I think that's, for me, that's I guess something that will occupy my small brain for some time to come, trying to make it happen.
Thanks, Louise. I might just throw to some of these questions because I'm conscious that time's getting on us. Although it's got to be said, we've got the interpreters and the AV guys till 3 o'clock because I did anticipate this conversation might go a little bit longer than we had flagged. So hang with us. We might not finish dead on 2:45. So we've got some specific questions coming out of the presentations. So we've got one here for you, April. Is the Smart Recovery Program available to all prisoners within the settings you work in? I find so many of our clients were unable to get the support they needed while in prison, and that one comes from Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Great question. So Smart Recovery, the Inside Out program is only in a couple of prisons in WA and most prisons in South Australia. Our position is it should be available to everybody. As other panellists have spoken about, in terms of command and control and behaviour, there have been lots of instances where people can't participate in the program because of behaviour sanctions and other things like that. So it is available for everyone who's sentenced and also pre-release, and our model at Bunbury Prison is really focusing on those pre-release. Remand is the biggest gap, and we're currently working on a remand specific module in terms of those more brief interventions, just introducing people to SMART. People might only be in the centre for a week, a few weeks. So how do we get some of those messages out and then obviously support them in the community? So yeah, great question.
Okay, I reckon this next one's for you, Kim. So a different Peter has made a comment that I'm interested in your perspective on. Interventions such as neuropsychological assessments and living skills will only support the person when leaving the prison situation, is the comment. You've done operational stuff in prisons. Is that your take on this, or do you have a different perspective?
No, I have a different perspective. So the idea of community integration needs to start at the point of intake. So it's not when someone leaves at the end. So enhancing someone's lived experience in the environment is critical to supporting their capacity to re-engage the community. So everything that we do in the prison environment should support their lived experience from that moment, which is the first second they come into contact with us. So if we don't know what their neurological needs are and why they're responding to behaviours, it increases their risk of being treated just like everyone else. And that's not what we should be aiming for. We should be aiming for individualised responses.
Cool. Thanks, Kim. This next one, I think I'm going to have to take on behalf of Minister Gentleman, but I think I know the answer, so I've got it. Sarah's asking, what is the tool being used in ACT prisons on reception to screen for FASD/neurocognitive disability? First of all, it's ACT prison, not plural. We've only got the one. And the second part is, I think that the Minister said in his presentation that that was still being determined. They're still working through that. So I think certainly Minister Gentleman would welcome feedback from the group that we have here around what sort of tool should be used, because that is still under active discussion right now, I think. Next one. This is another one for you, April, regarding the SMART program. Is this program adapted for people for cognitive impairment to enable their active engagement?
Yeah, great question. That's something we're currently working on at the moment. A really good example is that a SMART recovery meeting generally goes for 90 minutes. And we know that 90 minutes is a really long time for people with cognitive impairment, for neurodiverse people. So one of our top strategic priorities is diversity, and so we're really looking at, you know, how do we make the meetings more inclusive, and it's certainly a top priority for us around, you know, is it the format of the meeting, is it the length, is it, you know, the tools that we use. So we're looking at all of those things to see, you know, how we can make them you know, more inclusive for people with cognitive you know, impairments, and also neurodiverse Australians. So Mel and I have had quite a few chats about this, and it's a big piece of work, but I think, you know, we'll be relying on our partner organisations to really lead the way with us around, and we know these adaptations are already happening out there, but, you know, how do we bring them back in and make those, you know, across the board so that we've got more of those groups available for people.
Kim, I think the next one's for you again. This is a question from Blake. I'm curious, in relation to cognitive assessments conducted on entering the prison system, how are these assessments used to guide therapeutic interventions as opposed to being used to mitigate risk? Furthermore, on release from a custodial setting, who owns the psychological assessment, the individual or corrective services? Do you want to speak to the settings that you're in, Kim?
Yeah, so what the diagnosis that comes with a person actually supports, as I said before, every lived experience that the person has inside the site, and supports us to actually help them navigate different elements of the facility, because prisons are very complex living arrangements just by the nature of their cohorts. So it's extremely important that information is made available to all people who interact, and not labelling, actually working out how to provide a positive point of care based on those individual needs. The second part of the question in relation to who owns the information, well, in South Australia, we work in partnership with the SA Prison Health Service. So all the information stays in the database, that the Common Health database. And I think in particular, the conversation around NDIA and NDIS is that those models are owned by the people. So, you know, and I think that's a huge step forward in how we share that information out.
I think that's right. And it goes to what Louise was talking about before, you know, can we go the extra step and use these assessments done in custodial settings to enable NDIS applications and the development of plans that actually can assist with through care and providing services on release as well, so that we can add to the through care that's able to be provided in the states and territories. So I know everything's different in different states and territories, but I hope that gives a bit of an answer to the question. Next one is again for you, April. The Inside Out Smart Recovery Program and Yarn and Smart Program sound like such a valuable resource for those in custody. Are these sessions delivered by service users or AOD workers in that context?
Yeah, another really good question. We have a number of models. The preferred model that we have is where it's co-facilitated by peers and a community-based organisation. So generally they will be AOD workers that are coming into the complex to co-facilitate with the peer in the custodial environment. We also have where it's facilitated by peers with an officer co-facilitating. That's another model that we have. But our preference is, you know, such as our partnership with Palmerston and Oars, where you've got that organisation coming in with the peers so that they can then get more holistic support post-release, because those organisations run those services. So that's the the preferred model that we have, and it looks differently all around the world and here in Australia as well.
Next one I'm going to throw to Jody, and I can see that you've already had a side conversation with Trish here. Jody, Trish is with the Deafness and Mental Health Statewide Consultation Liaison Service in Brisbane, and she's talking about developing a research project to look at mental health issues for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are deaf or hard of hearing and incarcerated, and she's looking to connect with Jody about that stuff. Jody, do you want to comment on the lack of research in that area and the need for it?
Sure. I was thinking that it would be very valuable for us to remember who already are First Nations people and what evidence we already have in, for example, we have the Royal Commission into Deaths in Custody. We've got that information. We have the Detention Centre Commission that's been done in the Northern Territory, recommendations from that. And I have to say that from a First Nations perspective, what we're seeing and why our mob are in custody so much is poverty. So we do know that if we can have Australian society improve the quality of life of people, then we can reduce perhaps poverty at the bottom line. So we really need people to be assessed and diagnosed early. I think we also need to work with organisations, health sectors such as psychologists, Indigenous allied health services, and where we can, recruit the right people to do that diagnostic assessment and have a team that's appropriate. I've been listening to everybody today and I think it's been brilliant. I've worked in the justice services system in Queensland, New South Wales, the Northern Territory, Victoria, and I've visited with interpreters all over the country. And I think what's lacking is the appropriateness in terms of the access to interview these people who are in custody. Deaf and hard of hearing people, I think it's worth you knowing that 80% of people who are Indigenous have a hearing loss but don't even know it. And so there's a huge crisis with ear disease and otitis media. And what we're seeing from an early age, children get ear diseases that are not diagnosed, not picked up, and then it just gets worse. So it just adds fuel to the fire when you've got other drugs and alcohol involved. So, for example, if I guess you're communicating with somebody who has a hearing loss, the most they're going to get, the top lip readers are going to get 30% of what they can see on the lips. And that's if they have English, fluent English. So if you look at other workers like people who come from overseas, migrant workers who have accents and poor literacy skills working with people, their lip patterns are not able to be recognised, and that then reduces the amount of communication somebody can glean working with those people. So that impacts how deaf and hard of hearing people receive instructions. Also, it's another barrier in the prison system where there is no accessible sound through the announcement systems. There's no audio support. There's no amplification services within prisons. So access to interpreting is very expensive, and the prisons also don't want to use interpreters because of the expense, and they don't even want to use me because I'm too expensive. So I think that the benefits for the custodial system is to have a conversation, to look at what they can offer now. If they can have captioned announcements, if they can have live captions on the TV, if they can have amplification systems, and, you know, different types of audio devices so that people can talk with their legal services and understand them, because at the moment there isn't that technology provided. It's not enough. So we need to look at various ways in which the prison or justice system can provide access.
Thanks, Jodie. Now, I know we're in overtime, but I'm going to try and punch out just 2 more questions and then ask anyone for any final comments. One I'm going to take myself, just because I've been throwing them at you guys flat out. Let me take this one. So Antonia asks, workers in the AOD sector would like a better understanding of how to support, write great reports to assist clients in accessing the NDIS. Yes, they would. That's really important. And that's why I think that after this, I need to work a little bit harder to connect with the NDIA around this. But the thing that is going to be a barrier in the first instance is you need clinical assessments for disability to underpin any report. It would be wonderful if workers in the AAD sector or the homelessness sector or custodial services could assist people with the process of putting in the application once they've got the assessment. But your initial barrier is that you need an assessment that says the person's got a disability and what it is before you can then get to the next step. And that's part of why I think we need to be engaging with the NDIA around this stuff. How do we help to get these assessments for people? How do we engage with state and territory governments outside the custodial sector? And how do we engage in buying these assessments, which we need to purchase for people who don't have the wherewithal or families to pay for them? How do we do that to make sure that people from marginalised and disadvantaged backgrounds actually get a crack at getting into the NDIS? So that's something I will be taking up on your behalf. I wish there was a more simple answer, but that's the answer at the moment. And April, this last one's for you. Does Smart Recovery engage with children in contact with the justice system, especially incarcerated children? Excuse me, sorry, I've been talking too long now. I wonder if children also have the same high rates of personal and or family history of AOD use, and I feel like the holistic family-oriented approach could potentially work well here, especially if parents or carers of incarcerated children were being supported in their AOD use. April?
I feel like I could have wrote that question myself, because it's so on point, and this is why we need to have holistic family-centered approach. So absolutely, we have a youth-specific program, and we've got 8 youth meetings currently running around the country at the moment with some fantastic partners like Task Force and Weave Youth Services. Also working with Confit Pathways at the moment to get the program back into New South Wales juvenile justice centres. So previously, Smart Recovery has run within that environment, and of course talking to partners right around the country around, again, having it both in the custodial environment or youth prisons, juvenile justice centres, as well as back out in the community. So it is really important. We do see that intergenerational nature, and that's not because addiction's genetic or anything like that. It's around, what are the coping mechanisms and behaviours that you've seen, and how do we actually support you to address those. And so certainly we see young people and ultimately then support for parents being a big need as well. And we are in the process of developing some specific resources for parents around who may have a child with a behaviour of concern around how to support them. So it absolutely has to be family centred. And 66% of young people currently in youth prisons have had used illicit drugs, and it does lead to a lot of offending. But before all of that, we actually need to divert people away from the justice space. So we do offer certificates of attendance for both young people and adults who attend our program, which can be used at court. So ultimately, we don't want people being in, particularly young people, in youth prisons. But if they are there, then we're working hard to try and support them with the Youth Smart meetings whilst they're in that environment.
Cool. Thanks, April. I'm now even getting to the limit of my overtime here, so I'm going to pull the pin in a sec. But I'm going to go to first Jared and then Louise, because I feel like you got off a little bit easy in this discussion because you didn't have as many questions as others. Are there any last thoughts that you two would like to share? Jared first. Is there anything else that you'd like to share further to what we've discussed already today?
Well, Mel, the AOD sector is agile and innovative. It looks for ways in which it can bridge gaps and ways in which it can meet needs within dwindling resources, I guess, because they don't keep pace with the rising cost. However, funding rounds are prescriptive. They go down a very narrow lane, and the service needs to fit within that, which stifles innovation and stifles the capacity to utilise a service and mould it into a way where it can become, as Kim was saying, individualised for a person and not necessarily having to treat that person like you treat everyone else, particularly for people with disability. I think the other aspect of it, and I have made mention to this before about the stream of people coming through the diversion programs, which we totally support. But I think the corrective service system, because it is corrective service, needs to have a look at itself in relation to the fact that they take responsibility for people and they take responsibilities from people while they're in there. So they have a heightened responsibility. The punishment is being sent to prison. The punishment is the removal of liberty. People shouldn't go to prison and come out worse off because they're not sent to prison to be punished. The punishment is actually the removal of liberty. And so while they're in there, there should be access to things like cognitive assessments that mean something rather than part of a risk framework for managing a particular person while they're in prison. Things like we've heard around Auslan and other ways of communicating with people that have, hearing difficulties or who may be deaf. Captions on TVs, Jodie certainly mentioned those, and things like audio devices. But remand and the significant numbers of people that are on remand should be used as a solid intervention opportunity for corrective services to begin to work within a corrective framework with those people, whether it's disability related, drug and alcohol related, criminal behaviour related. And I think, that it's about time that there was a kind of a review in relation to the responsibility of corrective services as it assumes responsibility for the entire person who is sent to prison.
Well, I think we've made some friends here today, Jared, and we're going to continue these conversations going forward. I can see Kim nodding furiously there as well, and we've got Mick on board, so we will continue to pursue this stuff. Louise, we've got 1 minute left. Do you want to share some sage wisdom?
Yes, well, probably my sage wisdom would be that silos and disconnection are our enemies, and so many of the stakeholders that we were all talking about here and the communities that we serve are all wearing hats belonging to each group. So bringing everyone together like you did, Mel, in this sort of forum in itself is what I'd like to just close with, because I think you did an amazing job pulling this together, and it does create some possible vision for going forward and how to do it.
Thanks, mate. And I think we'll finish on that thought, but just be rest assured, everyone, this is not the end of our journey. We've had a lovely talk today, and we've realised that we're in furious agreement about quite a lot of things. So we will continue to carry this forward. The recording of this event will be up on the AADC website within a couple of days, as soon as we can sort that out. And we'll also add to that any resources or activities that we do along this vein going forward. So thank you so much to everyone. And thanks again, Jodie, for getting off the plane and doing this. And thanks to Louise for doing it on a ridiculous time frame. It's the middle of the night over there, I think. So thanks, everyone. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.